Thank you for that. So again, let me start over again. You are all gathered here to experience this webinar on plan review requirements for the California Energy Code, the requirements of the Energy Code and how they apply to the California's healthcare system and facilities. This is a new requirement as of January 20th, 2020, and the 2019 California Building Standards Code. The California Energy Commission and OSHPD worked close together to publish these requirements. So you all know this presentation will be recorded and posted on OSHPD's website along with the handouts. And the handouts, if you didn't notice, they are also on the GoTo webinar control panel available for you to download. You are all here for about an hour presentation with question and answer at the end of the presentation. During the presentation, you will all be muted during the presentation, but you'll be allowed to type in your question into the GoTo panel. So please be sure to keep your questions generic. If you have a specific question that applies to a specific project or a specific instance, feel free to email us at webinarroom@oshpod.ca.gov. Again, that's webinarroom@oshpod.ca.gov. If the presentation experiences transmission difficulties, we will go ahead and log out and then log back in, and you should do the same if you have those types of issues. So today for presenters, we have Mr. Richard Tannehill, Senior Architect and Building Standards Unit Supervisor within OSHPD. And also we have Bill Gao, Senior Electrical Engineer, also within the Building Standards Unit here at OSHPD. So Richard, if you're there, it's all yours.
Thank you, Caesar. Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending today. This probably won't run a full hour, but we'll try to stretch it out as long as we can, not to bore you, but to get your time in. But we just want to make sure everyone's up to speed on what's required for plan review when it comes to applying the energy code. So let me go through some basics first. Okay. This is new to the building code as of, like Caesar said, as of the 2019 cycle. And basically for the energy, this is in part 6, this is actually in 7-103 of the administrative code. It says for hospitals, skilled nursing facilities, and intermediate care facilities, the office, OSHPD, shall enforce the regulations of the California Building Standards Code as adopted by the California Energy Commission, State Fire Marshal, and Division of State Architect. For energy conservation, fire life safety, and accessibility. So basically, this is new that we have to apply energy requirements to healthcare. But there are a lot of exceptions and limitations to that, and that's what we're going to go through today, as well as how to apply it and document it for plan review. So what the CAC currently says for building energy and efficiency program is projects that consist of any new elements related through A through D. Below, which you should be able to see here, let me turn my pointer on, down here, but that actually is not the case. There was this was printed in error before we knew the full extent of the enforcement, and it is being corrected in the intervening code cycle, and it's just going to point you to the energy part 6 of the energy code, and then you just comply with those requirements only. So what's the energy code say? So in section 141, it says additions, alterations, and repairs to existing non-residential, high-rise residential, etc., shall meet the requirements specified in these sections. But it also states that there's an exception to this section, which alterations to healthcare facilities are not required to comply with this section. So alterations or remodels do not need to comply with this section. So what is a healthcare facility? A healthcare facility is any building or portion thereof licensed pursuant to the California Health and Safety Code. So basically, licensed healthcare facilities are exempt from the remodel requirements. So if you're doing an addition or a new building, you do have to comply with the requirements for the energy code. But again, any alteration or remodel for licensed healthcare facilities are exempt. Even though remodels may be exempt, there are opportunities here for energy savings. If you're doing a remodel, you can revisit HVAC loads based on possible new occupancies. You can adjust the air changes per hour versus actual loads. You have opportunity to make adjustments to this based on the remodel and the use of the building. It's the same with the ventilation rates. You can review filtration requirements. You may not have the same requirements as needed for a hospital, even though it's depending on what you're doing in the space. Consider converting to variable volume, and also maybe switching over to LEDs, which most people are doing anyway, for lighting levels. Okay, so you want to evaluate your overall impact for Part 6 compliance as if it were a new occupancy, and just apply what you can. Again, it's just an energy saving opportunity, even though it may not be required. So we're going to look at today is look at what the difference is between the CEC, the Energy Commission, and OSHPD, what's regulated, where the enforcement is being done, application to additions and expansions or new buildings, the resources and training that's available out there, as well as what's required during plan review. So let's look at what's the difference between OSHPD and CEC's definition of addition. OSHPD states that an addition is an extension or increase in floor area or height of a building or structure. And it's pretty simple. So it's basically you're adding on or building a new building, or in addition to the building, or an expansion. The CEC states that an addition is any change to a building that increases the conditioned floor area and conditioned volume. It says see also newly conditioned space. And what's the definition of that? Newly conditioned space is any space being converted from unconditioned to directly conditioned or indirectly conditioned space. So this could be a shell space that was built 10 years ago and now is being built out. That would need to meet the requirements of the CEC's definition of a newly conditioned space, so the energy code would apply to that space. Again, not to the fenestration of the building, but to the components within that space. And we'll look at some examples of that later on. So what's regulated? Again, there are, like I said at the beginning, there are a lot of exceptions to what's going to be required for health care facilities, but primarily these 4 areas are what will apply. You have your building envelope, which includes your walls, windows, roofs, floors, and other elements of the enclosure of a healthcare building. So you would have to demonstrate that these elements meet the requirements of the energy code. Mechanical systems limited mostly to minimum efficiency requirements of the equipment, and most controls do not apply. Domestic hot water systems are included, and lighting systems. And again, most controls do not apply. And question always comes about outdoor lighting. If you have outdoor lighting, yes, it must comply. But the reason there's a question mark there, it may or may not be under OSHPD jurisdiction. If the power is coming from the building that's powering the outdoor lighting, it would be under OSHPD jurisdiction. But if it's site lighting, like in the picture here, it may be going to local jurisdiction. But either way, you're probably going to have to deal with some level of the energy requirements for that. What needs to be verified for enforcement? Again, you'll see this repeated a lot, those 4 points, but LED lighting, equipment efficiency ratings of equipment, and your building envelope, which would include insulation, leakage, the fenestration, which would be also your glazing type, your percent of fenestration, and the orientation of the building. All these things would need to be verified during the process. So if you don't do care, you're probably familiar with the commissioning requirements of the energy code, which will be done through different sources. But when we met with the Energy Commission to help codify these requirements for healthcare facilities, they were not familiar with the TIO program and the IOR program that OSHPD uses. And they have put into their code that the plan review, because of the plan review is extensive, that we include exterior assemblies and detailing. We have electrical lighting design specifications, as well as the mechanical systems design and specifications. And there's a lot of energy code modeling already going into hospital designs. And during construction, there's continuous inspection and observation, as well as verified reports, TIOs, and also a certain level of commissioning and occupancy certification that they have allowed OSHPD to enforce all the requirements for the energy code for healthcare facilities from throughout plan review and through construction and for certification. And we'll go through what that looks like in a little bit. But this section that's shown here basically gives OSHPD that authority. The TIO for the 2019 has been revised. Section E or tab E has been added to include the NRCIs, which is the certification of installation that would be required. And we'll cover that a little bit more as well. So I'm going to turn this over to Bill for applications to additions and expansions.
Thank you, Richard. And Bill, if you're there, go ahead and share your screen.
Yep. Thank you, Caesar. There we are. You should see my screen now. So we're going to discuss applications to addition and expansions. And hello, everyone. This is Bill Gao, and I'm a senior electrical engineer at OSHPD. So I'll do my best to cover this material. And I'm sure you'll have some questions, and we'll be able to address those at the end of the presentation. So this is an example of an expansion of an existing hospital. So, oops, nope. Excuse me, wait a second, laser pointer, there we go. So here's our existing hospital. Here's our new addition, or it could be a build out of an existing shell space. We have a HVAC unit on top of this space. And so what do we have to apply to meet the energy code requirements? The interior lighting needs to meet the energy code requirements. The new HVAC equipment needs to meet the energy code requirements. The building envelope would have to meet the energy code requirement. But since the building is being served, the domestic hot water is being served from the hospital, it's okay as is. It will not have to meet the energy code requirements. So in essence, you apply Part 6 requirements for the new elements serving the newly conditioned space at the time of construction. So we'll look at another example here. And in this example, we have the new expansion, but the HVAC equipment is from the existing conforming hospital. So the new lighting and the envelope will need to meet Part 6, but the HVAC equipment and the domestic water, which is existing, is okay as is. So let's look at some resources, training, and software that is available. In this example, we have our hospital here, and we have our proposed design that will meet the energy code. There are multiple ways to meet the energy code, and we'll look at this a little bit deeper in the presentation, but in this example, we have performance requirements, and so the envelope and indoor lighting and plumbing will use the performance method, which is a software-based method for meeting the energy code requirements. For the mechanical system and the outdoor lighting and signs and electrical, will use, and the process will use the prescriptive method. So there's multiple ways, multiple mixtures to meet the energy code requirements. So this is a real world example of a hospital that can meet the energy code requirements. It's using a mixture of performance and prescriptive measures on the different building systems. So a great resource is Energy Code ACE. Its material is all approved by the California Energy Commission, and Energy Code ACE works closely with the California Energy Commission. There are fact sheets that I recommend you look at. When you go to their website, they have very nice search tools. If you click on healthcare facilities, it'll bring up all the fact sheets and other documents that are related to healthcare. You'll find training materials on site on the website that discuss hospital requirements. And there are various tools that you can find to help you with your energy code compliance. So we'll look at OSHPD plan review requirements. So the energy code has mandatory requirements. Mandatory measures establish a minimum level of energy efficiency and or performance of the building. So these are mandatory requirements, and healthcare facilities must meet these mandatory requirements. It should be mentioned though that there are several exemptions of mandatory requirements that are required for other facilities, and healthcare has been exempted from them. An example is the solar requirements for buildings. Healthcare is not required to meet these requirements. Okay. As I mentioned earlier, there's additional requirements in addition to the mandatory requirements. Buildings must also comply with prescriptive requirements or performance requirements. The prescriptive approach is based on the various building components, and there are prescriptive performance levels for these building components. The performance approach uses trade-offs where you can trade off the prescriptive approach. You still have to meet the mandatory measures, but you can trade one system off, building system, for the other system. And this is a software-based approach. And we'll see some more information on other slides here. So the Energy Commission requires non-residential certificate of compliance forms to be completed for your design. Only those forms that apply to building components in your scope of work need to be submitted. And let's look at the different forms. So on this page, you see all the forms that are required. Most projects will always have sign forms, outdoor lighting, and electrical, if these components are used in your project. You will never need solar ready because solar ready is exempt for healthcare facility. And you won't need the commission form because we use the TIO program for hospitals. The mechanical, performance, and process are forms that you'll likely be using. And you might be using the lighting and envelope and plumbing, but you might be using a performance as opposed to a prescriptive method to meet these requirements. So Energy Code ACE has made a checklist that will help you and OSHPD review your plans. For example, here, we are going to use the prescriptive approach for indoor lighting. The form self-populates when you click on these different boxes. And you can see here that we're going to check to see if your indoor lighting form says it complies. For your performance approach, again, your form needs to say you comply, the building complies. So here is a NRCC form for indoor lighting. You complete this and it needs to say you comply. If your design does not comply after completing this form, you need to go back and redesign your indoor lighting so that your watts per square foot meet the or below the maximum amount. Here's the performance form. And you can see this box has a project summary. And these are the forms, the prescriptive forms that you're still required to submit, even though you use the performance method. And so for this example, you would still submit the indoor lighting, the outdoor lighting, and the electrical power distribution forms. Again, it needs to say you comply. And Richard, this is where I hand off back to you.
Thanks, Bill. While we do that and Richard shows the screen, I do want to remind everybody that you do have the option to type in your question into the go-to panel. So far, we have 3 good questions. So we want to be able to give you, afford you this opportunity to ask questions as it relates to this presentation. So type it into the go-to panel, and if you don't, if you can't think of a question now, you can always email us at that email address that we gave, and we'll give it again at the end of the presentation. So Richard?
Thank you, Caesar. Thank you, Bill. Just want to go back and just kind of highlight a couple things that Bill talked about. Energy Code ACE is a third-party company that has been working with the Energy Commission as well as OSHPD to develop this program. So as Bill mentioned, they're a terrific resource for that. They also provide a lot of training. So go online and check out the training that they offer. They have a lot of stuff recorded and they have a lot of videos on that. Also on the checklist that we're looking at, these are also provided by Energy Code ACE, and they all are interactive. So as you fill out this information, depending on what you're doing, the documents will expand and provide the requirements that are needed as you work through this. This slide here shows, so it says at level number G2 that all NRCC documents are printed on the plans. That's the key to plan review. These forms must be copied and printed on your plans, on your construction documents. And we'll go through the whole list of what's required for that. But we get a lot of questions all the time. How do you show compliance? How do you know this is good? Now, OSHPD's not going to go through and check your calcs on your energy, but they are going to check your forms, that the required forms are provided and that you have appropriate and corresponding NRCIs, which is your certificates of installation, on your TIOs are also applicable and are checked off. But really important here that all of these need to be on the plans. So what are we comparing between the certificate, certification, and the drawings? Current version of the software that's used, make sure it's applicable to the code cycle that's in use right now, that's in force right now, in this case, the 2019 code, that you're not using an old version of the software when you do the calcs. We'll also be checking that the square feet are on the same drawings and match this certification, the NRCCs that were submitted for review, and that the glazing percentages are the same as on the drawings. Also make sure that the number of floors is the same. I mean, this sounds pretty obvious and basic, but we will have a 4-story building come in and the calculations or the NRCC says 2-story. So that's stuff that we pay attention to. Moving on, we verify the forms that must be on the plans are on the plans using the checklists. And we verify the certification correlate to what's on the TIOs. As I mentioned earlier, the NRCIs must match the NRCCs that are on the documents. And we verify the window U factors matching drawings and specifications, as well as spot check the details. Do wall roof details match what's being declared in the energy calcs and forms? What do we want to see on the plans? As I mentioned, the NRCC forms that state that they comply with the design must be on the plans. Typically, these are in the mechanical drawings, but they can be wherever you want to put them, but make it clear if they're grouped together, if they're separated, we should have some way of finding them easily so that we're not wasting the review time just looking for documents, because they can be spread out pretty thin sometimes. But what we would want to see is that they are all grouped together. You can have energy documents or sheets that you just paste everything on. Like I said, typically we see them in the mechanical drawings as they're impacted a lot more. We want to make sure that all certifications that are required are pasted in the drawings. Okay, and this is, again, popping back to one of the checklists. This is the project summary. It identifies what's required and what's not required, as Bill showed this slide earlier. So we're going to look at that and make sure everything that's required does show up on the plans. So also, in addition, there's a final signature sheet that must be on the plans. Mandatory measures that are required on the sheet, that the checklist I showed, must all be on the plans. Power distribution with the signature sheet and signed. Outdoor lighting with the signature sheet, and the indoor lighting with the signature sheet must all be on the plans. Here's just an example, as I mentioned earlier, that things can be distributed throughout the plans, but here's the U factors and stuff showing for the fenestration performance is just identified on a box on the exterior elevations. We see that actually pretty common for the windows and for the insulation of the building. This shows up on the exterior elevations. Again, we're going to cross-check these to make sure they align with what's on the NRCC forms that are submitted. TIO, again, all NRCCs should have a correlating NRCI. I don't know if you can read this very well, but these are the NRCIs for envelope, mechanical, indoor lighting, plumbing. You check off which ones would apply. And then during construction, the NRCIs, once they're installed, you get a certificate installation and you submit that to the field staff and the IOR. So that's kind of it. Really, OSHPA during review is checking compliance with forms to make sure that the forms apply to the project being submitted and that the forms show that the energy calcs comply with the requirements of the energy code. We're not doing a lot of analysis on that, but we are checking that everything does match up and meets the requirements. If you have any questions on this or would like to be part of the process, if you go to the OSHPA website, to the Hospital Building Safety Board website, you can get a list of our meeting dates and get involved with our process. We welcome the community's input and the industry's input on all that we do. So if you see things that you want changed, get involved and help change it. We're here to make life easier, believe it or not. And with that, I'd like to open it up to questions, and just want to again just remind you that if you have specific questions on the project, please email them to webinarroom@oshpod.ca.gov, and we'll get responses back to you or get you directed to the right people. And thank you for your time, and I'm going to pass this back to Caesar for the Q&A.
Great, thank you, Richard. I do want to share that we have a lot of information dealing with Energy Code ACE, and there's one of the questions that I'll start off with is, do they have a phone number? And the phone number, if you want to jot it down to them as a direct resource, it's their hotline number. It's 1-800-772-3300. Again, that's 1-800-772-3300. And they can also be reached by email address, if you want to jot this email address down, at title24@energy.ca.gov. Again, that's title24@energy.ca.gov. So we'll continue with the questions, and the next question I'm going to read off that we received, and again, thank you for submitting these questions, is what if you upgrade the HVAC or domestic water heater to serve the expansion? Do those elements need to comply with Part 6, or would that be considered an alteration?
If items in the existing building, sorry, Bill, I'll take this.
Yeah, thank you, Richard.
Are being replaced or upgraded, that would be considered a remodel. They would not need to comply. If they are being relocated into the new building, then they would need to comply. Or if they did not previously exist and were being added as new, even in the existing building, then they would need to comply.
Perfect. Thank you, Richard. We got a next question. The question is, are these specific forms from Energy Code ACE required for OSHPD, or are they California Title 20 forms required?
Basically it'd be similar to a TIO. We don't require a specific form be submitted. These are just good examples of what we would want to see. If you go through Energy Code ACE, everything is done through their system and is automatically generated for you. Once you input the information, you just print out these forms, PDF them or whatever you do, and paste them on the drawings, and you're good to go. You can create your own forms that are similar, but it needs to have the same information provided. Again, our TIOs are the same way. We provide them for you to use, but you can create your own if you choose to.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Next question is, if you have a 4-story building but only changing one floor, do you list 4 or 1?
If you're doing a 4-story, if you have a 4-story building and you're remodeling it, you're exempt from these requirements and you don't need to worry about it. If you're doing a shell space on that, it's still a 4-story building, but you're only going to be concerned with the items going into that space. So you wouldn't need to worry about the fenestration at that point. If you're filling in a shelled area, you would only look at the loads serving that space, the heating loads, or anything, the water, the lighting on that floor.
Perfect. Bill, if you're there, this question might be for you. The question reads, if we are under 0.65 watts per square foot on a lighting retrofit, not replacing the fixture, is this exempted from NRCC and the prescriptive approach?
Yeah, so this is a relamping is basically what we're talking about, or a LED conversion of a existing light fixture, troffer. And since it's a remodel, it's not under, it's part of the exemption and not required to meet the energy code requirements.
Perfect, thank you, Bill. Again, and I want to remind everyone, if we're answering these questions and it's still unclear, feel free to email us or type in the question again and ask for further clarification. Richard, this next question is for you. The question reads, a project is capturing existing parking space underneath a patient care floor, but not increasing the footprint of the building. Does a new exterior envelope enclosing the former parking need to comply with the energy code?
If I'm understanding the question, you're creating a new conditioned volume of space, and in which case it would. Now, how you do the calculations on that, they can do it on a partial piece of the building, like on a single floor. if you're adding new fenestration. Again, the modeling program should accommodate that. So I would go through that resource, but yes, it would need to comply because it's a new conditioned volume space.
Great, thanks, Richard. Got another question for you, Richard. Numerous OSHPD 3 facilities are established in suites or portions of freestanding non-residential / commercial buildings fully subject to the energy code. What is a practical way of presenting and achieving compliance with the energy provisions in these instances?
There's a lot of variables there. Again, you're remodeling it as a licensed facility. It would be exempt from these requirements. But if it was an unlicensed clinic space, you would need to comply with the requirements of that space. Again, it's going to vary on, are you going to have your own air conditioning or heating HVAC unit serving that space? There's going to be a lot of factors to be considered. These would be most likely reviewed by the local reviews if they're not non-licensed clinics. The local jurisdictions would be reviewing them and could walk you through that. I know where you're coming from, Glenn. There's a lot of, if you have a partial building, how are you complying with this? But in most cases, these are going to be remodeled into licensed OSHPD 3 facilities. You're going to be exempt from these requirements. So again, when we're doing an expansion or an addition, we're looking at those 4 items: the HVAC, the water heating, the lighting, and the fenestration, and only if they apply. So this will probably change in the future as the code develops and there will be more requirements. But for now, again, there's a lot of variables in that question, but that's the best way I can answer it, is that it sounds like a remodel and it would be exempt if it's a licensed facility, but would have to fully comply if it was non-licensed clinic.
Great, thanks for that, Richard. We have another question having to do with structural items within a facility. Does the definition of addition have anything to do with seismic joints? Structurally, an addition adds structure to an existing SPC building, vertical and lateral systems.
From OSHPD's point of view, yes, it would, but from the Energy Commission, it's just the addition of conditioned space. So it can be a shelled space that's being fit out, and you're going to have to comply for that space. It doesn't matter if it's already part of an existing building. So any addition or new space would have to meet the requirements of the Energy Code.
Great, and I hope that answers that question, but got another question for you, Richard. This individual says, I'm currently working on a roof replacement. We are replacing the roof finishes and trusses. Will this require energy calculations for just the roof system or the entire structure?
If this is a hospital or a licensed healthcare facility, it would be exempt from Energy Code requirements because it would be considered a remodel or alteration. These are good questions and they come up every day. So this is actually the direction we thought it was going when we first thought we would have to enforce the Energy Code, that we would have to look at individual roofing, but if it's a renovation, go back to section 141, it's a licensed healthcare facility, it is exempt.
Great, and I want to read off this question because it might be asked again or people might be wondering, and the question is, will these slides be made available? And we did mention at the beginning of the presentation that in the go-to panel, if you look at on the panel and towards the bottom under the handouts tab, you'll find that we provided this presentation in a handout form for your use and download. So feel free to download it as we're sitting here during the question and answer portion of the presentation, or you can wait and we will go ahead and post it on our website as well. If you want to go ahead and email us at webinarroom@oshpod.ca.gov, we will also we would be happy to send that to you as well. So continuing on with the other questions, Richard, I have another question that says, I believe envelope/architectural is regulated as well, but did not see much discussion about it today. Could you clarify or comment on that?
We did talk about the envelope of the building. Yes, it's regulated if it is an expansion, a new expansion or a new building, it would be regulated and would have to comply with the Energy Code Commission requirements in Part 6. Again, we're kind of telling you what's required to get it through plan review for what documentation. We're not telling you how to design it or what the requirements of the design would be, because to be honest, we don't, that's going to vary project by project. But we would want to see the NRCC forms for the shell have to be filled out and included with the project if it's an expansion or a new building.
Perfect. And thank you for these questions, everyone. Keep them coming. The next question reads, does a replacement of a failed cooling tower fall under the CEC requirements?
No.
Perfect.
It's a replacement, it's maintenance.
Okay, next question. Are OSHPD 1 and 2 buildings exempt from the requirements of Cal Green, Title 24, Part 11?
Cal Green is optional for healthcare facilities.
Perfect. If the project is a remodel of the break room or office inside of a hospital, would that still fall under the exemption for healthcare facilities? And we do not have to comply with Title 24 for these project areas?
If the remodel a licensed healthcare facility, it would be exempt.
Perfect.
A lot of people got really afraid of this code when it was coming in. We had a lot of projects in 2018 that were, or in 2019 coming in at the last minute, trying to beat the deadline because they were really afraid of what this energy code requirements would require. And it's actually very little impact to the project. Like I said, we're looking at even the ones that do have expansion to new buildings that we do apply the energy code to. There's really those 4 items, you know, the HVAC, the lighting, the water heating, and the building envelope. And to be honest, a lot of the stuff has to comply anyway. HVAC units you cannot purchase in California unless they comply. So there's a very little impact to what you're doing. There's just unfortunately, there's a lot of confusion around it. So hopefully this helps clarify some of that confusion, because these are good questions. So like Caesar said, keep them coming. But hopefully that helps.
And this next question might fall under the same type of answer, Richard, because they're asking is if a failed air chiller needs to comply as well.
Yeah, if it's being replaced, it's a remodel or an alteration or a maintenance. It does not need to comply. Now there may be requirements when you purchase it that's going to comply. Meet those. That would be it.
So why do OSHPD 3 licensed buildings require full energy code compliance, but not hospitals? The point of this person's question is HVAC.
A licensed OSHPD 3 clinic would have the same requirements as the hospital.
Okay.
If it's a licensed healthcare facility, a clinic or a hospital, those same requirements would apply and the same exemptions would apply. If the local jurisdictions are confused on that, they can call us and talk to us on it. But they do not have full energy code compliance unless it's a local ordinance or something like that that they're enforcing. But we would not have any say over that. A OSHPD 3 licensed facility typically goes through the local agencies for review. And to be honest, they may not know about the exemptions for a licensed healthcare facility. So again, this does, especially when you get into clinics, this really crosses a blurry line about what's going to be required. But a licensed OSHPD 3 facility is exempt from these requirements. Again, if it's a new clinic, it does have to comply with the 4 items that we discussed.
Richard, what about a change of use space in a project? Are energy calcs required for that project?
No. A change of use in the same shell would not trigger energy requirements. It would trigger a lot of the code compliant issues to be upgraded, but energy would still be exempt. Another item is the OSHPD 1R buildings. If you sat through some of our seminars on that, you know that these are buildings that are acute care have been removed from. They're old hospital buildings. They stay under OSHPD jurisdiction. Acute care is removed from them, and the use is changed to either clinic space. It could be psychiatric, skilled nursing facility, offices. There's a myriad of uses that building can be used for. Those are still considered hospital buildings under the license and are still exempt as well.
What about an existing vacant acute care patient wing with beds in suspense for remodel to reoccupy this wing? Is this considered exempt?
Is there a question on that here? Are you making that one up?
No, it's a question. The question reads exactly how I read it. It says, what about an existing vacant acute care patient wing with beds in suspense for a remodel to reoccupy this wing? Is this considered exempt?
Okay, I was just stalling for time. I like to read the questions as I'm going through this. Existing vacant acute care patient wing that's in suspense, it still lies under the license. It is a remodel. It's still under OSHPD jurisdiction. It would be exempt. Now, if you're adding a new wing to that hospital, then that new wing would need to comply. If you're remodeling it, it's still under the license of the hospital. It is exempt.
Great, Richard. Thank you for that. What about, let's see, are OSHPD 3 MOBs considered licensed healthcare facilities where alterations would need to comply with Part 6 requirements?
An OSHPD 3 medical office building would be most likely be considered licensed and would be exempt. Again, when you have a clinic, the OSHPD 3 requirements are there if they want to get them licensed. There's a certain level of construction that is required to get CMS funding by the federal government, and that's what CDPH is tasked with surveying and enforcing. So that's why the OSHPD 3 level is there. It's to get that license so they can get reimbursements or to do different types of functions within that, and they become licensed facilities. They are exempt. You can have a MOB that is not licensed, and that would not be exempt and would have to be full compliance with the energy requirements.
So, Richard, what about the conversion of space use again? So, and this may be the same answer you already spoke about, but or shared. But the question is, what about a storage space that is now being converted to an occupied space in a licensed healthcare facility? Will this be considered a shelled space that is being converted, or is this a remodel?
No, it's not a shell space because it's a existing storage space that is now being converted to an occupied space. So it is considered a remodel. Shell space would be a true shell space where it's just concrete floors and up to the structure above, and you're now conditioning that space. And actually with a shell space, there's not going to be a lot of requirements other than lighting and possibly some HVAC if you're adding a new unit to service that space. Most likely the HVAC units already exist and the water heating already exists. The fenestration is already there. So you're only really looking at lighting for a shell space.
Great. I do want to share with everyone that we truly appreciate the questions coming in. We do have about 9 minutes left, so we're going to go try to get through these as quick as possible. So if we don't read off the question and your question doesn't get answered, please feel free to email us at that email address, webinarroom@oshpod.ca.gov. And thank you, Bill and Richard, for being patient and providing these answers. So the next question is, it was mentioned that CalGreen is optional for healthcare facilities. Is that for even new buildings and expansions?
Currently, yes.
Perfect. What about OSHPA 3 program? It says, the question reads, OSHPA 3 program is typically in B, quote unquote, occupancies, which are mandated by CalGreen.
That would be with the local jurisdictions, not with OSHPD.
Perfect. Next question is the California Title 24.
That may sound like a cop-out answer, but if the local jurisdictions have different requirements, that's not being enforced by OSHPD just because it's a clinic space that they're enforcing the green requirements. Local jurisdictions can have more strict requirements, and they just can't go less strict. So sorry for interrupting you, Caesar.
No, that's quite all right. I got a more of a fundamental question here for you, Richard. The question is, what does it mean, licensed hospital, OSHPA 3 building?
There's another question similar to that about how do you know if a facility is licensed or not. The licensing is done through CDPH. And again, there's various reasons a facility would be licensed, but primarily it's a way for them to get reimbursements through CMS and Medicare, sorry. They have to go through a license process for again, in this case, OSHPA 3 building would be a clinic building. There's different types of services which would be in that building. It can be surgery, it can be dialysis, alternate birthing centers, psychiatric counseling type situations. It can be primary care buildings. And again, they do not all have to be licensed, but if they are, that's primarily the reason they are. So if you're doing a OSHPA 3 building or a clinic building, advise your client right away if what their intent is with licensing. I probably get a question once a week about a facility that was trying to get a license that they did not do plan review for in OSHPA 3. I mean, it's kind of off topic here, but basically all hospitals have to be licensed as well as SNFs. OSHPA 3 clinics, it is a owner's choice.
Great, thank you for that, Richard. And Michael, that may have answered your question as well. So, Michael, if you still need further clarification, again, reach out to us and answer or send us an email. We'll go ahead and answer that for you or provide further clarification. Bill, if you're there, this question might be for you. The question reads, California Title 24 for lighting includes a lot of lighting control requirements. Will you speak to how the control requirements relate to OSHPD projects?
Yeah, so we're talking about the mandatory lighting requirements, lighting control requirements in 130.1. And this is indoor lighting requirements. Many of the indoor lighting requirements are exempt, like multi-level lighting controls is exempt for healthcare. The mandatory area control has some exemptions for patient bathrooms and for security rooms for psychiatric units. One that is not exempt from for hospitals is automatic daylight controls. That's the main one that is not exempt, but most of them are exempt. So review those things and those requirements in the energy code, and you will find usually terms like exception, healthcare not applicable or exempt for healthcare. Again, I also would recommend that you review a document at Energy Code ACE called What Changed in 2019? Non-residential, high-rise residential, hotel/motel. And the last 3 pages of that document is a good summary of the exceptions for healthcare.
Caesar, if I may, there's a question that's coming up a lot about OSHPD 3 licensed clinic being exempt. I have changed. I'm assuming my screen is still being shared. This is where the exemption comes from. This is for remodels and alterations and repairs. And this may not be answering the question fully. This is where it's stating that alterations to healthcare facilities are not required to comply. If, again, the requirements for healthcare facilities that is being enforced is this. Again, if the local jurisdictions have more strict requirements requiring OSHPA or Cal Green or other requirements, those requirements would still need to be met through the local jurisdictions. It's not something that OSHPD is enforcing, and it's not under OSHPD jurisdiction. So hopefully, I mean, it's not a solid answer because there's a lot of variables in that, but this is the requirements for licensed healthcare facilities. These are the requirements for expansion or new construction.
Perfect. No, that's perfect, Richard. That may have answered Mark and Matt's question on OSHPD 3 licensed clinics as well. So thank you for that. And we do have about 2 minutes left, and want to remind everyone, Richard, Bill, if you're done, I'll do some closing comments. I want to remind everyone that if you have a specific question for a specific project, and you still need help or clarification, or maybe need pointed in the right direction, give us an email or shoot us an email at webinarroom@oshpod.ca.gov. Again, if you have a specific question or a specific concern. Also, feel free to download today's presentation on the GoTo webinar panel. It's a handout of this presentation, and this presentation, and hopefully as soon as we get it converted, we'll post the presentation on our webinar page on our website. So just so you know, if you don't know, you can sign up for our OSHPD's mail server list to receive notifications on notifications, field tips of the day, webinars up and coming, by logging onto our website at oshpod.ca.gov, and on the upper right-hand corner, there's a link to subscribe to the listserv to do that. So we will be having up-and-coming webinars presented by the Building Standards Unit. We will have the 2019 Intervening Code, which will be in 2 sessions, one in January and one in February. And we're also going to be presenting the Accessibility CAN 2-11B. Those dates are going to be determined here soon. So sign up so you can get a notification of when we're doing that. And if you are interested at all in reviewing some of the past webinars that BSU has put on, we've put on collaborative review and construction and phase plan review per PIN 50, the remodel CAN 2-102.6, equipment acreage per PIN 68, and updates to the 2019 Building Standards Code. So with that being said, we want to go ahead and thank you for joining us today, and thank you for doing your part in providing access to safe, quality healthcare environments. So stay healthy and stay safe.